Tragedy in the Channel as 27 drown trying to reach the UK. Britain and France trade blame over who's responsible for the single largest loss of life in the waters that separate them. But what could have been done to prevent it? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the catastrophe in the English Channel. One day after dozens drowned crossing the Channel, dozens more made the perilous 34-kilometer journey through icy waters just for the chance to make it to England. It seems not even the risk of death can deter those desperate enough from attempting the crossing.
Because I need to make a future, I need to make a life, to bring my family, to call my family, to help my family, to send money, everything.
Now, the tragic incident on Wednesday saw 27 people lose their lives when their boat capsized in Channel waters. Among the dead were 17 men, 7 women, and 3 children. It's the largest single loss of life in the Channel since the International Organization for Migration started keeping records in 2014. Both the British and French governments spoke of their sorrow, and UK Home Secretary Priti Patel made it clear she'll do whatever's necessary to stop it from happening again. But right now, her plan to stop it means making the crossing ever more difficult.
People should, Madam Deputy Speaker, claim asylum in the first safe country they reach, and nobody needs to flee France in order to be safe. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are not waiting until the Nationality and Borders Bill passes. We are undertaking a wide range of operational and diplomatic work. I have already approved maritime tactics, including boat turnarounds for Border Force to deploy. The government, the police, the National Crime Agency are taking action at every level to take down the people smuggling gangs. And once again, however, we cannot do it alone. We continue to work closely with the French to prevent crossings.
Leaders from Paris and London were scheduled to meet to discuss how to deal with the crisis, but after British Prime Minister Boris Johnson tweeted a letter saying migrants who reach the UK should be sent back to France, Emmanuel Macron's government was incensed. The French Interior Ministry said Priti Patel was no longer welcome at Sunday's interministerial meeting. And the French president said he would be ready to talk when Britain decides to be serious.
So ministers will be working seriously to resolve a serious matter with people that are serious. This is why, from Sunday, Minister Darmanin will gather his counterparts from the European Union and the Commission to work on this issue. And afterwards, we will see with the British how to act efficiently if they decide to be serious.
Despite their differences, both France and the UK are aware of just how perilous the situation is. Over the past 3 years, the number of asylum seekers attempting the journey from France to the UK has risen dramatically. In 2019, just over 1,500 asylum seekers crossed the English Channel by boat. The following year, that number rose to more than 8,000. And this year, so far, around 26,000 people have made the journey to the UK from France. Well, hundreds have died crossing the Channel, but the UK is adamant the best and only way to stop it from happening is by cracking down. It's a strategy many human rights groups believe will only lead to more deaths.
Shocking events that I think should make everyone stand still and just contemplate what this means. People who have taken a terribly dangerous journey across the world's busiest shipping lane in search of safety. It has to make the government stop and think again about whether its strategy of using enforcement, control and security is going to work.
So what could have been done and what can be done to prevent the deaths of asylum seekers in the English Channel? To discuss that now, let's cross to London, where I am joined by Yasmine Ahmed, the UK Director for Human Rights Watch. Stephen Woolfe is a former member of the European Parliament for the UK Independence Party and now the director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. And political campaigner and hip-hop artist Lowkey also joins us from the British capital. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, human rights advocates had been saying for some time that a disaster on this scale would happen. Yasmine, what is going wrong? There were warnings. Why couldn't this be prevented?
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show and for discussing this very important issue. I mean, the first thing to note is that the reason that people are crossing this channel is not because they don't care about their lives, they don't care about the lives of their children, but they are willing to get on these very, very flimsy vessels in circumstances where they know there's a chance that they and their children could die because there is not enough legal routes, safe and legal routes, which are provided for refugees to be able, asylum seekers to be able to access. So governments like the UK, France, and many Western and other countries do not provide the means for people to be able to arrive in a safe manner. And what we have said time and time again, and what we have seen in Australia, in Greece, all over the world, is when people do not have a safe way to seek asylum, which is everybody's legal right when they are being persecuted and in fear of their life or otherwise in fear, they have a right to seek that asylum. And if you do not provide safe ways for them to do that, these disasters will happen. The English Channel will become further a graveyard for those souls that have sought protection in the United Kingdom. And essentially, it is the responsibility of all governments around the world to be providing these means for people to come. I think one very important illustration in relation to this last incident was that one of those who was on the boat, who thankfully survived, was actually an Afghan policeman who had worked alongside the United Kingdom in Afghanistan and who had to seek safety and was forced. So we can see the reality of what this means.
Right. So, Stephen, I'll ask you. I mean, Yasmine argues it's really on the governments to provide safer pathways for people to seek the asylum rights that they are actually entitled to under international law. So what's the problem?
Well, I think there is some agreement between Yasmine and I. First and foremost, there are the international law that says that we must look after those who are genuine asylum seekers who are fleeing the categories that the UN Convention says we must look after. And I also agree that globally, as a whole, whether it's the European Union, the United States, and other countries, do not provide what is classified by groups such as Yasmine's as safe routes. Of course, David Cameron did set up a safe route for Syrians in camps in Turkey. And so there have been attempts at doing so. But where we disagree is that I follow what the World Bank is now saying, is that globally about 65% of all migrants now are economic migrants, not genuine asylum seekers. And that is the first time in the reports that we're seeing from government organizations, international organizations, that really genuinely support open door migration. And secondly, where I do agree, is governments have failed here. Macron has blood on his hands for the deaths that occurred in the Channel because his anti-UK, anti-Brexit immigration policies are determined not to allow migrants to stay in France, and they want to push them to the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Can I just come in here?
Go ahead, Yasmine. I wanted to ask you also, I mean, what Stephen brought up about those statistics in particular. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, the British Refugee Council just came out with statistics this week, I think it was, or last week, which showed that the majority of people who have claimed asylum in the UK have in fact been granted refugee status. So I think it's a complete misnomer, and in fact a very dangerous narrative where we're saying that the idea that these people aren't genuinely refugees. The fact is that the UK government, the Home Office, which I'm sure you will agree with me, are doing a very rigorous job in assessing whether people meet the international criteria for protection under the Refugee Convention. Majority of those who have come to the UK by routes such as those that we've seen have been found to be genuine refugees who fall within these the criteria.
Okay, let me get Lowkey in here. I want to ask you specifically, you are in the UK. Do you agree that the blood as Stephen put it, is in Macron's hands in this specific case of this channel crossing with 27 migrants dying. Is your government doing all it can? Is this really France's problem and not the UK's?
The blood is not only on Macron's hands, it's also on the hands of the European Union and the Frontex agency. Across the last few decades, 40,000 people have died trying to get into the EU. But the blood is also on Priti Patel's hands and this government for the callous indifference which they show to people who in many cases are fleeing wars which this government directly launched. So if you have a problem with people coming to your country, you should have a problem with the bombers going to theirs. And the very same companies who benefited from the war on terror, like Lockheed Martin, who increased their share value by 1,200%, are also tasked with militarizing the European Union's borders. So they're profiting off of both the displacement of people, and let's not forget that the war on terror encompassed tens of millions of people being displaced. It also, on average, led to about 46 bombs being dropped per day for 20 years. The very same companies that benefit from displacing people are also benefiting from securitizing the process whereby those people are able to come to countries like England. And let's not forget that some, like Stephen, would probably see that these people be disqualified from the right to claim for asylum by their method of arriving in this country. Well, the Geneva Conventions are very, very clear. There should be nothing like that taking place for people who are trying to come here in whatever way they come here.
And Lowkey, just very quickly, are you referring to the Nationality and Borders Bill that's going to make sure that anyone who illegally enters the country cannot even apply for asylum?
Precisely. And if they do that, then the British government will be in contravention of the Geneva Conventions.
Okay. You know, Stephen, it's interesting because Lowkey was talking about kind of the nefarious businesses that he cites for kind of creating refugees, but you cite the responsibility of the businesses that continue the refugee crisis. You talk about the human trafficking, for example, that you think actually France helps perpetuate. Explain that.
Yes, I believe that the Western governments are aiding and abetting people traffickers by not having immigration policies that are clear. In one way, as I said with Yasmine, not having set up situations where you can have asylum applications done outside of the country, but also not pushing back. And when you look at the fact that on the border of Afghanistan to the kind of mountain range that travels to Pakistan, only a few days ago, 1,500 vehicles were leaving that border town and was monitored oversight by drones, each of them paying roughly around $1,900 for the first stage of the journeys. That's just to get them into the Pakistani and then into Iran. From Iran, another group of asylum people traffickers take on the routes all the way down to Europe. And from there, they're picked up by third groups. They're all interlinked. And when you look at the amount of money, 150 million was made by people traffickers this year alone on the 25,000 that have come across the channel. That money is then used for child abuse, sex abuse, building into these gangsters using links for drug trades. It's also helping other nefarious crimes.
So interesting, though, Stephen, because, you know, France is making the same sorts of claims against the UK for saying it is the UK's fault for not taking serious action against traffickers, that they are profiting somehow from it as well, and that they are not taking action against those who continue to employ undocumented migrants, exploit undocumented migrants, but providing an incentive for them to make this risky crossing. And then parties, pardon me, but like yours that they cite specifically, that gain politically from building on the fear of immigration and stoking this crisis.
Well, we don't.
Go ahead.
You know, parties don't stoke the issue. They listen to what people have and deeply concerned. And as of course, you know, if you look at areas where I was born, I'm mixed race. My family is from immigrant background, when we come into the United Kingdom, we did so legally, Black, Jewish, Irish, and English. So there isn't an issue generally with the idea of immigration. What there is a concern about is mass large-scale immigration that's not controlled, and then the problems that come from that.
Okay.
And this is one of those problem areas. People traffickers forcing large numbers in, yes, because they've been caused by issues that Lowkey raised. And I was fundamentally one of those who were opposed to going into Afghanistan and also into Iraq before that, because this is the consequence. But ultimately, people are concerned across the country how it impacts them. Never seems to impact the rich in very wealthy areas where I live, for example, in Winchester, but they do where my parents live in Manchester and Stockport.
Yasmine, I saw you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that, the first point here and I think it's really helpful that you raised Afghanistan as an example, in fact, because this is exactly what's happening, is the reason why people smugglers are becoming empowered, which we all agree is wrong, is because there are not safe routes. And when the United Kingdom and France and other countries don't take their global responsibility seriously, neither do neighbouring countries in the region, which themselves already shoulder the vast, vast majority of refugees, countries which themselves are severely economically deprived. So when our government says that one of the key solutions to the issue in Afghanistan is talking to the regional countries about allowing refugee flows into those countries, Pakistan, Iran, Uzbekistan, what do you think their response is going to be? Their response is going to be, well, you're not taking your responsibility. You're not upholding your responsibilities with respect to people, so why should we? The whole problem with all of this is not looking at it on a micro level. It's saying that the solution to this is ensuring that people who are fearing persecution, fearing for their lives, have a means to leave and seek asylum. I think the other very important point to make, a lot of people do this, is they make this very, very artificial distinction between those that are coming legally, lawfully, on and are sort of somehow standing in a queue properly somewhere in the world, and those that are coming irregularly, unlawfully. That is not the way it works. That's not the way the asylum system or any of the systems that we have work. We have programs of managed migration. We have it in relation to Syria, and there have been commitments in relation to Afghanistan. They are a tiny drop in the ocean of the amount of people who need protection. And many people don't have the luxury to wait in a refugee camp in a line that doesn't exist. The example of the Afghan policeman is the perfect example. I am sure you would agree with me that that is someone who deserves protection, but he came on a boat. So what do we do with refugees who are genuinely fearing persecution and can't wait in a country for a scheme that only takes a drop of people? This is about a global responsibility to deal with people who are in fear of their lives. The answer, like in response to anything, isn't further criminalising. Criminalising never, ever solves a problem.
Lowkey, I want to get back to you. As an activist, I want you to tell me as well, because there are so many British people who say, you know what, people can't just pick and choose where they want to come, and they can just decide that they want to come to Britain because we have benefits here that will make them, richer, while poor Britons themselves take some kind of hit. Talk about why you think these people that are trying to cross the channel specifically want to and are justified in coming to the UK. They don't want to stay in France or wherever else the other point of entry was. Why do they have the right to cross?
Well, because this debate is so couched in threat inflation and projection, of problems that were created by our ruling class onto the shoulders of the most vulnerable, it's important that we're clear about proportion. Only 0.18% of the population in this country are refugees. There's over 1 million people in the country that have no recourse to public funds. If they do have recourse to public funds, it's about £37.50 per week. Who costs the British public more? People that are coming and are desperate for help, or people like Rupert Murdoch, who for 11 years it's believed, did not pay any corporation tax. People like UKIP donor Paul Sykes, who is based in the Channel Islands. You know, Britain's overseas tax havens are responsible for 37% of all tax losses around the world for governments. You have to remember that Britain didn't have an empire. Britain was an empire. It occupied 14 million miles of the planet. When you look at people coming from, number one, former British colonies, but also in the case of Afghans, we can't forget that at the same time when Priti Patel and others were theatrically expressing their sympathy with Afghan people, you had a 5-year-old child in this country, Mohammed Manib Majidi, who was from an Afghan family of refugees, placed in what the fire brigade said was an unsafe hotel with flammable cladding on it, with windows which many customers had complained were unsafe. This 5-year-old child, on the 18th of August, fell to his death. What we have is a system of lethal negligence towards these people, whether they die in the English Channel or they die being restrained by G4S guards. This is the infrastructure within which we live, which essentially is trying to move the crimes of the powerful and place them clearly, squarely on the shoulders of the less powerful. When we look at people complaining about them not being seen in their doctor's surgery, who's to blame for that? Is it George Osborne and the Health and Social Care Act? Is it the program of austerity, which has seen it privatized by stealth? Or is it a person whose name that you struggle to pronounce, who is from a country that your own government drew the borders of within the lifetime of your grandparents?
Okay. I'll tell you what, we're down to our last about 4 minutes. Stephen, I'll let you respond. And please do include what your fears really are then for this crisis in itself if this issue between France and Britain doesn't get resolved.
Well, what will happen, and what we estimate next year, is that in Afghanistan, of a population of 32 million, there is a situation of huge starvation. We already recognize that 3.5 million people are estimated to leave this year. Now, in response to what Yasmine says, the question is, do we take all 3.5 million in Europe? And if so, then according to Lowkey and others who I have deep respect about the issues of trying to solve it through taxation, 3.5 million people in Europe, can we really afford to do that and not have an impact? For example, in the UK, the 255,000 people who live in one-bedroom accommodation, the 2.6 million pensioners who are living in poverty. Money is finite, it doesn't grow on trees, and we don't pull it out the pockets of every rich person across the globe. It comes mainly from the middle classes and the lower incomes in a country. Lowkey should know that and recognise that, and that is why we have to be responsible about how many people take and how it must be done legally.
Okay, Yasmine?
Well, again, I think so much of this is hyperbole, and so much of this isn't around the reality of the situation. The fact of the matter is we don't take even a pin drop of the percentage of people that are seeking asylum, and only a pin drop of those that have been seeking asylum have attempted to come into the United Kingdom. So in reality, the idea that 3.5 million people will come to the United Kingdom or into Europe is really a fallacy, and it's something that's blown up in order to make people scared and fearful that are going to come into the UK. That is untrue. I think the reality is if we, the reality is that we as a global community need to take responsibility. The only other solution is that countries like Pakistan and Iran and others will continue now to put their borders up further and ensure that no one leaves. And those very people who fought with us in Afghanistan, those very people who relied on us in Afghanistan, are not going to be able to have freedom, and many of them will risk their life.
Yasmine,
so really, this is not a solution.
Right, very quickly, because one of the solutions at the beginning that Steve alluded to is one I've heard many times before from particularly conservative politicians throughout Europe and the UK, the idea of kind of third country outsourcing. He mentioned camps in Turkey where people could apply for some kind of asylum. Why is that not a realistic solution, third country outsourcing?
Well, I think when you're talking about third country outsourcing, you need to think about it in two ways. So one is the approach that Australia has adopted, where they have sent people off to Nauru, and where they actually have offshored people. And then another approach would be, for example, when people are coming to the Channel and trying to cross the Channel, instead of them crossing the Channel, providing them with a safe route would be at the UK border on the Channel to allow for at least a preliminary assessment of their eligibility. Now, that's something that is a viable option and would be a safe route to prevent people from having to do what they have and to stop the people smugglers at the very core of what they're doing.
Okay. Stephen, very quickly, I saw your eyebrows go up. You can have 30 seconds.
Well, I think it's a very sensible solution if we use different countries. We did analysis on Albania. It would actually profit Albania to $500 million and reduce and cost save the UK over $500 million as well. And at the same time, you'd still be able to allow asylum applicants to be done in those different countries. We have to look at different solutions where we can bring the costs down, but still allow the processes to continue.
Right. Albania did not react well at all to that suggestion. It must be added.
In the context of Australia, it's been found to not only be unlawful under international law, it's been found to be ineffective to stopping people arriving and coming. Okay. And it's found to be expensive and costly to the extent that it would be a small proportion if you actually were dealing with them lawfully in the country. So none of your policy arguments are effective.
We'll have to leave it there. Yasmine, Stephen, and Lowkey, thank you all so much, really, for being with us on this edition of The Newsmakers. We greatly appreciate it. And to our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.